Very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm actually standing behind this so the TV cameras pick up Iowa State. This is a rare opportunity for me because this is such a good science and technology and engineering university that it gives me a chance to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is a long way outside of normal politics. But before I do that, let me just say very briefly that we did yesterday in Des Moines announce a 21st century contract with America. This is the legislative component. There are actually four components to it. One component is executive orders. You can go to newt.org and you'll see a section on the very first day. And the idea is that after the inaugural address, I would sign somewhere between 50 and 200 executive orders moving the federal government as of the very first day within the framework of the law. For example, the very first executive order would abolish all of the White House czars. And so you go through a series of those steps. The second part of the contract is the legislative program, which we would try to get enacted in the first year. That's longer than we took with the contract with America in '94, because these are more complicated, they're much bigger, many of them are newer, and because I think people are sick of things being rushed through Congress, like the stimulus package that nobody had even read, like Obamacare, which Speaker Pelosi said you have to pass the bill to learn what's in it. I think the fact is that people want to see regular order where subcommittees hold hearings, they have open markups, they go to full committee, they hold hearings, they have open markups, they go to the floor, they have the right to amend on the floor. I'm going to recommend to the Congress that the conference committees be on C-SPAN so that because they're among the most important meetings. And so people ought to see legislation being written because this represents such a large scale of change that you need to be involved. So the first thing is the legislative program. The second thing is executive orders on the first day. The third part of the new contract is a training program for all the transition team and all the presidential personnel on the grounds that the scale of change we're going to try to implement is so large that people really need to be trained into where we're going and what we're doing. For example, I think we should abolish the Department of Energy because it's been essentially an anti-American energy bureaucracy that has been remarkably accomplished. If you go out to recruit a Secretary of Energy and you say, and your job is to get rid of your job, you need to work through with them because the first thing that will happen is the bureaucracy and the interest groups will try to capture them to get them to say, oh, we really need to keep it. And so you need a training program because we're going to be so different. The last part is you. The fourth part of this new contract is to tell people, I'm not asking you to be for me. Because if you're for me, you'll vote and you'll go home and you say, I sure hope he gets it done. That is impossible. Under our constitutional system, no single individual can achieve the scale of change we need. And so we need citizens who are willing to be with me for 8 years, getting the Congress to do the right thing, getting your state legislators to do the right thing. And at the risk of embarrassing her, the majority leader, Linda Upmeyer, is here, so she can talk to you about the legislature later on. Getting the governor to do the right thing, but also if we shrink the Washington bureaucracy, if we implement the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which says the powers are reserved to the state and the people, and Washington becomes smaller, citizens have to get bigger. So this is a real fundamental change I'm outlining for all of you. Now, I think where we are, and I'm going to explain it in more detail in a second, but I think where we are is captured brilliantly by Abraham Lincoln. This is the only thing I'm going to read to you today, but I think it is so profound. You know, President Lincoln was an attorney who had never managed anything larger than a law firm with one partner. His entire military experience had been serving as a volunteer temporarily in the Black Hawk War. And Lincoln found himself fighting a civil war, having to reorganize the federal government, having to organize the Army and the Navy. Just no president learns as much as Lincoln learned. He's a remarkable man. And it isn't going well. The war is very painful, the casualties are enormous, the cost is immense. And so in December of 1862, Lincoln writes a message to Congress. And this is part of what he wrote. And I think it fits us so perfectly that I want to share it with you. He says, quote, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. I think we're in a very similar place, and I don't think our political system or our news media system has been capable of having the conversation we need. We're in a different place for three very big reasons. The first is we're now in a world market, which is real and permanent. We're going to be competing from here on out. We came out of World War II, the dominant country in the world. All of our competitors have been bombed either by us or by the Nazis or the Japanese. The result was that we were over 50% of the world's economy in 1945. And we sustained an enormous momentum for a long time. Now we have real competitors. China is a real competitor. It's not a bad thing. They have every right to pursue happiness. But it does mean we've got to sort of roll up our sleeves and decide to compete. India is going to be a real competitor. And so we're in a different world in that sense. Second, we're going to have an enormous explosion of science and technology. I believe in the next 25 years, we're going to have 4 to 7 times as much new science as we had in the last 25 years. There are more scientists alive today than all of previous human history. They are connected with better computers and better lab equipment every year. They communicate with each other through cell phone and through social media with enormous speed. And they're connected to the marketplace by licensing, royalties, venture capital. So we're in a world of enormous change. We also are changing as a people. We're living longer. Remember, Social Security was developed for retirement at 65 when the average person died at 62. It's a sign of FDR's genius as a politician that people were grateful for a program most of them wouldn't get. The average age people lived in 1900 was 46. A young girl born in Japan last year will live on average to be 89. That means half of them will live longer than 89. Nobody's ever tried to design a world like that. Not only are we living longer, we're living differently. If you go and look at student dorms today, and you go back and look at student dorms 30 years ago or 40 years ago, and part of the increasing cost of college, candidly, is people live better. You know, you look at high schools that have to have huge parking lots. Why do they have to have huge parking lots? Because every junior and senior is driving. Go back 40 or 50 years ago, it would be unthinkable to have that scale of mobility. So people, think of yourselves. I mean, how many of you want, instant on television with 600 channels, and then find out on Wednesday evening there's nothing you want to watch? You want instant food, you want microwave ovens. I mean, this is a very different world than the world of our parents and grandparents. And we haven't adjusted to it yet. And the greatest lagging indicator is government. Because bureaucracies are built not to change. I used to do a riff about FedEx and UPS, which was actually a YouTube video called FedEx versus Federal Bureaucracy. And several million people watched it. And it was a very simple model. How many of you have ever tracked a package on either UPS or FedEx? Just raise your hand. Okay, so this is not a theory, right? We have technology today which enables us to track people, to track packages in virtually real time at no extra cost. It's just part of the program. The federal government has somewhere between 11 and 20 million illegal immigrants we can't find. And I've suggested that we simply send each of them a package. Now, in a way, what I'm suggesting is silly, but it's also illustrating a fundamental principle, isn't it? I was just down at the Florida virtual school system. Jeb Bush created a virtual school in Florida. It now has 80,000 students, K through 12. It's a different world. Things are evolving every day, and yet government is so encumbered. One of the reasons I'm very intrigued with Strong America Now is that it seeks to apply Lean Six Sigma to modernize the federal government. It would be the largest change in government since the Civil Service Acts of the 1880s. It would change 130 years of the way we behave. And we have to do it. We have to have a government which improves on a continuing basis. So there's another reason I wanted to come here today. I really want to recruit scientists, engineers, technologists, and students of science and engineering because of something which C.P. Snow spoke about in 1959. C.P. Snow was a physicist, a novelist, and a political figure. He was a cabinet officer in Great Britain. In 1959, he did the Reith Lecture on the BBC, and he invented what he called the two cultures. He said, in the 19th century, an educated person knew science and they knew Shakespeare. In the 20th century, we split them apart. And the more you specialized in science and math and engineering, the less you knew about literature, and the more you specialized in the social sciences and in history, the less you knew about science. He said the result is today, if you really know a lot scientifically, you probably are inarticulate. And if you're really articulate, you probably don't know a lot about science. So the result is, if you see somebody on TV and you can't understand them, they may be right, but you don't know what they said. And if you see somebody on TV and they're really clear, they're almost certainly wrong, but they sound good. That's a huge part of where we are. The only one of these I'm going to talk about today is number 7. Number 8, which is really different, I think, than any politician you ever dealt with. I spent 3 years with Bob Kerrey, the former Democratic senator from Nebraska, co-chairing an Alzheimer's study group. And I've studied science off and on my whole lifetime. Before I decided at 15 to do what I'm doing now, I wanted to be either a vertebrate paleontologist or a zoo director. So I've had a real interest in the natural world for my whole life. And as we studied Alzheimer's, which is a huge challenge for this country, the estimate is that Alzheimer's from now to 2050 will cost $20 trillion. And it's a human problem. It lasts a very long time. And the caregivers are twice as likely to have health problems as people who aren't dealing with Alzheimer's because of the stress and the strain and the difficulty. So it's a really big challenge. $20 trillion, by the way, is 1.5 federal debts. So you're going to see the scale, if you're representing the scale of Alzheimer's on a graph, you'd have US federal debt 14 trillion, Alzheimer's 20. So it's a huge challenge. So as we were digging into this, remember my basic model, we're going to have 4 to 7 times as much new science. Now here's what makes this fascinating as a public policy challenge. 4 to 7 times as much new science. If it's 4 times as much new science as we got in the last 25 years, it means that you right now are the equivalent of being in 1900. The Wright brothers have not yet flown. Ford has not yet developed the mass-produced car. There is no commercial radio. Television doesn't exist. And think about it. How would you sit in 1900 and design today? There have been so many breakthroughs. Now, we're talking about 25 years. I mean, there are people in this room who will still barely be middle-aged in the period I'm describing. But if there's 7 times as much new science, you're with Sir Isaac Newton trying to discover calculus around 1660. That's how big the scale of change I'm describing. So now you apply it to brain science, and you learn something really fascinating. We haven't known very much about the human brain because all the new instrumentation that lets us follow a human brain is only about 20 years old. So prior to sometime around 1990, we couldn't figure out what was going on in your head because we had no mechanism for following it. As we've started to study your brain, we've learned that you have about as many neurons as there are stars in the known universe. So one person is potentially the same volume of data as all of astrophysics. These are the 2 largest users of computing power that we have. And the brain scientists I meet with tell me you actually have to go through 2 cycles of computer improvement to get enough speed and enough storage capacity to deal with what we're going to learn in the next 20 years. The current generation of computing will not be capable of dealing with the volume of data we're going to get.